on, everybody? Zack Rosenblatt here with Mike Kaye for the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. We're at NovaCare Complex. This either could be it, or we could be back again this time next week for a preview.
Yeah, there's a weird feeling.
The uncertainty is weird.
Yeah.
I mean, we both have, wavered from different sides of the spectrum in terms of them making the playoffs over the last, 8 weeks or so. I feel like we've both had different opinions about it, and they've changed, constantly because this team's been so weird. And now, we probably feel as good about the team as we have all season, and I feel like I think you're in the same boat as me. I'm not that confident they're going to get through after Sunday, but I don't know how you feel. But
yeah, I mean, it's tough to
when you need to rely on somebody else. It's hard. I know. And Merrill Reese pointed out on Twitter, there was that, I forget what year it was, where they needed 5 things to happen, and they all happened. It almost feels harder that the one thing is going to happen weirdly. I don't know.
Right. There is a mythical aspect of Nick Foles that we always joke about. It's something wants him to win. Well, whatever you believe in, or whatever he believes in, and if that's something that he believes in, does will it? I mean, it's just it's remarkable. It's just an interesting situation because this team was left for dead 2 weeks ago. They really were.
Yeah.
Maybe even sooner.
There was no reason to think they were going to do what they did the last 2 weeks.
And when you look at the last 2 games, there is a 2017 vibe. I know you've brought it up several times. It's just, this team just doesn't ebb and flow. They just flow. Granted, the Houston game was closer than you probably would have liked. There were some issues at the end of the Rams game, but those are 2 very, very good teams. And I think for the Eagles, whether you make the playoffs or not, I think you should feel really good about how you turned around the season. Now, there's always going to be games that you look back on, the Titans game, the Panthers game, the Vikings game. Oh my. I mean, those 3...
Just those 3 alone.
They win one of those. And
then they should have won probably one of the Cowboys games.
Yeah, I mean, but you look at the injuries that they've overcome, you look at how this team never gave up on each other, because there were some key moments. I mean, we had a podcast where we talked about, because there was times where, guys were questioning each other in the locker room, but it clearly, wasn't something that became a problem. They talked about it, and they were fine. Other teams, it could have spiraled another way. Well, I think that speaks to leadership, too, because I think a lot of those criticisms were thoughtful criticisms. It wasn't...
Yeah, it wasn't, attacking guys for the sake of doing it.
Right. I think... guys, I talked to BJ Bello, who some of you may have never even heard of, but he's a special teams linebacker.
Actually played quite a bit last week.
Yeah, they promoted from the practice squad, and I asked him why young guys are able to come in, because it seems like every other week there's a new practice squad player that's brought into the fold and has to perform. Why those guys are able to perform right away, and he said it has to do with the leadership. Guys in the leadership position love the game of football, and that inspires everybody else. Everybody wants to win for Darren Sproles. Everybody wants to win for Malcolm Jenkins. Everybody wants to win for Jason Peters. I think that speaks to this team, and then as you look moving forward, obviously we'll talk about it in the offseason, but this team does still have a really good base. I think with all the injuries, you don't realize how great of a base of talent this team has, and sure, Howie Roseman deserves some blame for the depth issues, and Doug Peterson and Mike Groh probably deserve some blame for how they've used some of their offensive players, and they're finally figuring things out. They're entering an offseason where they still have a base of talent. This team still can contend for the playoffs and a Super Bowl. I think the Eagles have to feel pretty good about how they've kind of turned things around. You can get into the Nick Foles, Carson Wentz debate all you want.
I don't think we need to do that this week.
We don't need to do that this week. You can appreciate what both do and both of their situations. It's not an if or thing. And so as we go into this preview episode, what I want to hit on most is, this game could be a letdown game if the Eagles do focus on the score of that Vikings-Bears game, which Doug Peterson has said that he does not want to stare at the scoreboard. He doesn't want to know about it.
But he did say he can't control what they put on the scoreboard.
Right, exactly. And I think, Washington's going to probably want to play spoiler. We asked Jay Gruden if that inspires the Redskins a little bit more. He said he's more focused on going 8-8, which is the ultimate Redskins answer. Gee golly. But we've talked about it before, the Joe Webb kind of backup mobile quarterback issue that the Eagles have had historically over the last 10 to 15 years. And Josh Johnson's one of those guys. The Redskins are banged up, but they still have a really good defense. Their offensive line is beaten to death. Their wide receiver group is not very good. You're coming up with the matchups for we do a weekly thing for the website and the paper about the three ideal matchups. Really, outside of Kerrigan versus Lane Johnson, it's hard to find those matchups because there's so many injuries on both sides of the ball. There's so many moving parts, and I think this game will be very interesting.
Yeah, just put everybody knows at this point, but if the Vikings and Bears game, so throughout the week, there's at one point Matt Nagy had made it sound like if he'll check the score at halftime, and if the Rams are up, he'll rest his starters. And then he kind of backtracked on that, where he's like, I mean, only if the Rams are up by a lot. So he's maybe he's just messing around with media. I don't know. I mean, but he is from the Andy Reid school of coaching, and Andy Reid has been known to do that sort of thing, rest guys at the end and prepare them for the playoffs, especially if it turns out that they play the Vikings the next week. So that, I mean, people are going to be watching the Eagles game, but I'm sure everybody's going to have the two-screen experience going on. That's not at the game, and it's going to be. That's going to be exciting. I mean, I just saw something that Adam Schefter tweeted. I guess Vegas said that if the Bears played the Vikings, the Bears would be 3.5-point favorites, and if they played the Eagles, they would be 5.5-point favorites. So the Bears might prefer to play the Eagles in the playoffs. But if I'm the Bears, I would rather play the Vikings.
So a couple of things. Kirk Cousins in a big important game.
I mean, his record is very bad. I forget what it is.
Very bad, especially against good teams.
Yeah, that's the thing. When it's against teams with a winning record, he's 2 and a lot of losses. It was something really bad.
4 wins. He's got 4 wins. Yeah. But it's
rounded down.
Yeah. This is not. We've seen teams rest their starters and still beat good teams.
Yeah.
I mean, you look at last year, the Eagles sat everybody after the first quarter.
They only lost, 6-0?
Yeah, Nate Sudfeld could have won that game. There was a couple of
6-0. That's so bad. Yeah.
He played the Cowboy starters. And so I think that could be interesting. I know they've got some guys that are banged up, like Allen Robinson, who might miss the game. But I think it's important. Mitchell Trubisky is not a guy that has a ton of experience, and I think getting him hot heading into the playoffs might be something that Matt Nagy wants to do. The Chiefs sat their starters last year. Patrick Mahomes played the only bad game of his career.
Yeah, that was his first ever start. Yeah.
So, it's fascinating. You brought up, they're playing to figure out who they want to host, basically, in the first week of the playoffs, if the Rams aren't there. And I think that's actually really important. So you don't want to show your best stuff against the Vikings. But if you beat the Vikings, who gives a crap? You know what I mean?
But I also feel like, I guess the game doesn't necessarily matter as much for the Bears, but I feel like they're not actually as much thinking about who they're playing the week after that, as much as just staying healthy and getting through this week.
Right.
You worry about that when you get there.
I would much rather play the Vikings.
Yes, yeah, for sure.
Oh, there's not even a question.
And they would have seen them twice, and they know them pretty well. I think that's a pretty obvious thing.
The thing, though, is they're a division rival. You don't want them to come back into your house and beat you. I think that'd be more embarrassing than... Matt Nagy seems like a really smart guy, and I don't think he's a very insecure kind of dude, but I do think it would be epic to have two disciples of Andy Reid go up against each other. You look at... I was looking at this the other day. You look at that Chiefs offensive coordinator position, and it's been such a stepping stone. I feel like we have to touch on that just because of all the... Pat Shurmur was there as an offensive... It was in Minnesota last year as an offensive coordinator. Doug Peter... look at, Reid's, stranglehold.
Sean McDermott.
Yeah, Sean McDermott. Todd Bowles. Ron Rivera, Leslie Frazier. Like, he's had 10 assistant coaches become head coaches.
Yeah, that's wild.
And then, I can't pronounce his name, but Eric...
the Chiefs running back coach or whatever.
Or he's the offensive coordinator now.
Coordinator.
He used to be the running backs coach.
But also, like, Bill Belichick's coaching tree, like, always got a lot of hype, but then you see, like, Matt Patricia just being an absolute clown out in Detroit.
And now
Romeo Crennel and Weiss were failures. Like,
Peterson and Harbaugh have won Super Bowls.
Harbaugh, yeah.
And now you look at Matt Nagy, he's leading the Bears to their first NFC North title since 2010. Sean McDermott was the first guy to lead the Bills to the playoffs in 20 years. Ron Rivera made it to the Super Bowl. I mean, his coaching tree is going to go down as maybe one of the greatest of all time. But enough Andy Reid talk. Let's get into this game. The Eagles defeated the Redskins earlier this year, Week 12. And, I mean...
I guess not a lot, but the main thing different is that the Sanchez, unless injuries happen, won't be playing this time.
Right.
Josh Johnson, he's actually played pretty well relative to, like, expectations for him. He looked pretty good for the most part against the Titans, besides, like, a late interception he had.
He had a really solid game against the Jaguars. Yeah.
I mean, if you're expecting him to go in there and be your franchise quarterback like that, but he didn't get as much. I mean, there was no reason to believe in him. He was playing for the San Diego Alliance of whatever that league is called. I don't even know what the hell it's called. But that last Redskins game was especially interesting because it was close in the first half. Adrian Peterson had a 90-yard run, and then the Eagles completely shut him down after that. Mm-hmm. And that was a big moment for that rush defense. They've played really well since then, for the most part. I think Ezekiel Elliott ran pretty well on them. But then, you had, like, Todd Gurley did not have a lot of rushing yards. He had a lot of receiving, but he's going to get yards on you. And then last week... they had Alfred Blue running, but I think Deshaun Watson, if you take away his rushing stats, they had like single digits or something.
Yeah,
so the rush defense is back on the track it was at in the beginning of the season.
And I think having Tim Jernigan there helps. I think Trayvon Hester has really kind of upped his game. He's a guy that I've been impressed with for the last couple of weeks.
Brad Adams played pretty well. I mean, Hicks is back.
Yeah, the whole gang's back together. Will it matter?
Not the whole gang, but most of it.
I mean, the gang that's not on IR.
Yeah.
Speaking of that, actually... before we get into this matchup, Mike Wallace, the bit of news.
True.
He's been activated off injured reserve. It sounds like he's going to play. He was limited during Wednesday's estimated walkthrough. If he plays...
I'd be pretty surprised if he played.
If he does play...
He hasn't practiced all season.
Who cares? If he does play... I don't think it really matters that much. Because why activate him now? Like, what...
Because if they make the playoffs...
Right, but, like, even then...
I mean, they have one... It doesn't matter.
Practice? What's 1 week?
I mean, it doesn't matter either way. That's why.
Whatever.
There's no way he plays on Sunday.
So, if he does play, he'd probably just be a decoy. I mean, you'd have to respect his speed. But when we talked to him yesterday in the locker room, it sounded like he was planning on playing, so I don't know, unless that's...
I mean, he's not going to say, I'm not planning on playing.
Right, yeah, I mean, I guess that's fair. But, he's listed as day-to-day, according to Peterson, so we'll monitor that as we head into the
It pretty much depends on how he feels after Thursday's practice, but...
Right. So this Redskins matchup, I mean, the Eagles have all their parts that they basically had against them. On paper, the Eagles should run through this team. They have something to play for. They have a much more explosive offense. They have a Super Bowl MVP as their backup quarterback, as opposed to a guy who hadn't played since 2012 heading into this year. That worries me. Because sometimes you can get like so in your head about the scenarios. You're human. It happens. And sometimes you can overlook a team or you can make mental lapses. I think the secondary has really kind of turned things around over the last couple of weeks. It's young. Having Hicks back probably helps.
I heard Lane Johnson on the radio yesterday, and they asked him about the idea of like looking past the team and stuff like that. He's like, he saw some study or some stat or something that like a team coming off like a big win like they had last week, like loses the next week like more than 50% of the time or something like that. Mm-hmm. So he's like, we know what can happen. Like, we talked about the Joe Webb game. Like, I don't, was that in the last? That was like at the end of the season, right?
Yeah, it was like week 16.
Yeah, and that cost them a lot. And this team seems like it's in a good place where they're not going to play down in their competition like they maybe did at the beginning of the season. I mean, we'll find out on Sunday. Nick Foles tends to play better against great teams than bad ones. Mm-hmm. Like, if you just look at it, like the Raiders last year, he was terrible against them. So it's a very interesting game. Like, and there's been a lot of weird stuff that happens when the Eagles travel to D.C. That's even when they're bad, they have a great crowd. Like, the fans love the Redskins. They're crazy fans.
So I think this is a game where we're going to see them run the ball a lot. This is going to be a very, hey, let's control the ball. Let's make this a game where Josh Johnson and Adrian Peterson really don't matter that much running the ball. Make them, let's kill their time, essentially. And I think Josh Adams has had two kind of meh to bad games.
He was bad last week.
Yeah, he was bad. I think this is a game where you kind of build up his confidence because you're going to need him in the playoffs. Like, you need...
even if they, in theory, don't make the playoffs, just have him going into the offseason feeling good about himself at least.
Right.
I mean, they're not going to be thinking like that, but, I mean, it would be good for him if he has a good game on Sunday.
Right. This isn't a game to get Boston Scott carries.
No.
That's basically my point. I think Darren Sproles...
He'll play a lot, yeah.
I think he'll play a lot. You've got to manage that relationship, and we'll talk about that in the offseason, but I think after missing all those games, his body is really well rested.
It's more about if he wants to come back next year or anything,
and
but yeah.
I think Peterson would love to have him back.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of... Because he's committed to retiring 2 years in a row now, so...
Right.
He's 35, he has a family, so I don't think it's guaranteed that he wants to come back, but he's a competitor. So.
I think it'll be a Corey Graham situation where it's Eagles or bust.
Yeah, like after training camp kind of thing. Like, yeah.
And I think you go in knowing, hey, we need house 4 or 5 running backs.
Yeah, you plan for that. Why Smallwood will still be on the roster next year, probably.
Right. Hey, man, Wendell.
He's going to be here for like 20 years, but wait, he's only been here 20 years. It feels like 30.
That's why we call him the unsinkable Wendell Smallwood. I would use Smallwood in this game. I think this needs to be a running back game because you've got Ryan Kerrigan there. Well, Lane Johnson was terrific against him in their first matchup. I think he only allowed 1 pressure. You need to be able to run the ball efficiently. I think it'll benefit the offensive line quite a bit to not have to be back there. I think putting the game in Nick Foles' hands, you've done that with the 2 big ones now. Let's see what you've got. Let's find a lot of balance here. I know Doug Peterson alluded to being upset that they couldn't run the football that well against the Texans. You got to come out strong. I wouldn't be shocked if they tried to run down their throat early and control the clock, because when you're facing a third-string quarterback and a pretty good running back, you want to make sure that they're not on the field that often. You saw what Adrian Peterson could do with that 90-yard run. And it's not often that you can shut him down for an entire half. So if you're the Eagles, let's take the ball out of his hands as much as possible. If we can sustain some really good drives, if the Eagles can sustain some really good drives, then you can control the clock and control the game.
Yeah, well, we can run through matchups real quick because it's pretty much probably just be the same ones as last time. Mm-hmm. You got Lane Johnson and Ryan Kerrigan, Alshon Jeffrey, Josh Norman, and then just defending Adrian Peterson pretty much would be the 3 I would think of.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really intrigued by the Jeffrey Norman matchup because you don't have DJ Swearinger back.
Yeah,
true.
And
so Josh Norman's had an okay year.
Not his best year.
I'm wondering.
He almost got into a fight with Taylor Lewan last week.
Yeah, which was impressive.
Bold strategy.
I'm wondering if this is his last year in Washington, too.
Kind of feels like it.
I'm wondering if the Eagles would have interest in him. He's such a big fan of Carson Wentz that maybe you look into that in the offseason. Maybe that's your one decent spending spree. But yeah, that's an intriguing matchup because Alshon's just played very, very, very well with Nick Foles at quarterback. And I don't think it's because of Nick Foles. I just think Jeffrey's a guy that plays well in big moments. And this could be a big moment. I was looking at the wide receiver numbers earlier. Nelson Aguilar and Alshon Jeffrey, while some may consider this to be somewhat of a down year, could actually have pretty comparable numbers to last season. Not from a touchdown standpoint with either one of them, but from a yardage and a catch standpoint.
Because the last couple of weeks they've had their best game. So
yeah,
Alshon had the 160-yard game. Yeah,
we've got to talk about Nelson Aguilar because if this team makes the playoffs, he's the most dangerous player on this team because you never know where he's he's going to attack. He can run every route. He's been blocking extremely well. And I think you saw that he and Nick have a very good connection. The audible play that turned into the 83-yard touchdown was an extremely impressive play. And Nick Foles is taking shots downfield, so that helps as well.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a bunch about Lane Johnson after the game because he just completely dominated and blocked J.J. Watt, and there was all that stuff about how he slept overnight after he found out he didn't make the Pro Bowl, so it made him angry, and that probably contributed, like, motivated Lane Johnson. That's a good thing, and he's clearly highly motivated right now. He's playing his best football of the season, which... I mean, he was battled through injury. He's another one of those guys that kind of has played through everything this year. Mm-hmm. Like, we'll go back and look at this season, and, like, there's just been so many dudes who either have been injured and haven't been able to play, or have, like, Jason Peters and him. Jason Peters, it's been a little more impactful to his performance. He'll probably play on Sunday. They sounded pretty confident he would from his quad injury. But Lane Johnson, man, he's... I mean, Ryan Kerrigan, him and Ryan Kerrigan have been battling for a few years now, and Kerrigan's mostly got the better of him, though the last time they met, I don't think Kerrigan did much.
Yeah, right. He only had one pressure. But I was looking at this the other day. Lane's only missed one game. Jason Peters hasn't missed a start. I mean, he's missed time. I mean, that's incredibly impressive for him and his age. Though I think his age is really starting to show. Down the stretch here. He's played well, but, you know, when you have to leave the game multiple times a game, you also probably need to invest in a better swing tackle, but we'll get into that in the offseason, I guess.
Bye, Ty.
Another guy we should bring up is Golden Tate, who had his only really good game against Washington.
Oh, it's true. I didn't even think of that. Hey, this might be his last chance to build up a better resume for free agency.
Yeah, you know, if I'm Golden Tate, I'm concerned that maybe I only worked really well in certain offenses, and maybe that could turn off.
And the Redskins just signed Marcus Smith for this week.
Oh,
a little revenge game. Game.
Man, I hope he's a captain. I hope he is.
Oh man, the Redskins are like, yeah, whatever. What do we have to lose at this point?
Yeah,
and he gets 5 sacks.
Yeah, he'll go up against Ty when Peters misses like 20.
Oh man.
Anyway, we're gonna get hated on.
That's this should be an emergency podcast now.
Yeah. Oh no. Breaking news. So yeah, I think you look at the Redskins have also battled some injuries up front, which I think will help Jason Kelce, Brandon Brooks, and Stefan Wisniewski. We haven't addressed Wiz, but Wiz has played very well since regaining the left guard job.
Well, because Samuel was injured,
Samuel's injury, and that's helped as well. On the defensive side of the ball, I mean, really the only guy, I say this now, the only guys you really want to worry about is Josh Johnson's feet and Adrian Peterson, and then, you know, Josh Dotson will go for 150 yards, whatever. I've got a lot of faith in this secondary. I think Crevon LeBlanc has been everything that I built him up to be, so good for my brand.
He earned, I mean, Jim Schwartz hyped him up today. He's played really well.
Yeah.
He might be their nickel corner next year.
Which would make sense, because then you can have a battle between Sidney Jones and Rasul Douglas, which then you feel good about because one of those guys will be on the bench and you don't have to feel like you have to address the position all that much. And then Jalen Mills will be on the other side, which probably gets a collective groan from half our listeners. But Rasul Douglas is playing very, very well. He played well against the Redskins in their last matchup. Avonte Maddox, I mean, we could host 3 podcasts on Avonte Maddox and still have new material, it feels like. But he's been pretty strong on the outside. We'll see where he plays.
It's so interesting to see where he's at long term.
Yeah.
Or at least next season, maybe not long term. But
right. And I think what's great about him is you can sustain whatever you need to sustain with him. Like, if you feel like your cornerback depth is good, then you can move him to free safety. If you feel like if you feel Crevon LeBlanc can be that nickel guy, then you can keep him on the out. You know, stuff like that. Malcolm Jenkins has played all but one snap this season.
That's crazy.
That's incredible when you consider all the injuries and how close.
There's a game when they had 99 snaps and then they had like 70 something the week after that. Like,
yeah, I mean he's a special player. He'll be around.
He can take a nap this offseason if he wants.
Yeah, we'll see.
But that dude's off seasons are like busier than his seasons. Like,
right,
it's
exactly.
Crazy.
Yeah, he's built up a durability to everything. I guess. But he's played very, very well. I actually think Corey Graham's played pretty well over the last
relative
month.
to what he was playing before that.
Oh, sure, but like
he still shouldn't be a team starting safety. But,
right, agreed. But over the last month, he's kind of found his groove a little bit. I think this will be obviously his last season in the NFL, but good for him to close out strong. Linebacker Jordan Hicks was kind of at half speed, but he played relatively well.
It's going to be an important game for him, too, if he can come out and look healthy. That'll be because he's going to be a free agent. So,
well, you keep bringing that up. I think this is an important game. I think a lot of these guys that are impending free agents want to get those extra games in the playoffs, so they actually can further, you know what I mean?
Especially a guy like Hicks who's been hurt until last week, so he kind of needs to show he's going into the offseason looking good at least.
Right.
Like if he goes out and doesn't look like himself, like that's going to hurt him.
Something I'm fascinated with, and I should be asking this more, is there's so many guys that were injured during the Super Bowl run. How does it feel? How would you feel if you weren't part of that Super Bowl run, got the ring, and the next year you didn't even make the playoffs? You know what I mean? It's one of those things where it just with Sproles and Hicks and Peters and all those guys, they worked so hard to get back, to not be able to return to at least the postseason, I would imagine would be pretty tough. Defensive line, Jernigan played relatively well in his minimal snaps against the Texans. I expect him to have a pretty decent game against Peterson. Overall, I think this defense is in good shape. I think Chris Long, Brandon Graham, and Michael Bennett have somehow been able to form a trio of plus 30 guys that have actually played well towards the end of the year. Michael Bennett will be on double-digit sack watch.
What's he at? 8?
He's 8. He's at 8. Fletcher Cox is 7.5, so he needs 2.5.
By the way, Brandon Graham had 11 quarterback pressures last week.
That's insane.
Yeah, he's ending the season pretty well. He's going to make a lot of money. He's talking again. Like yesterday, he talked like someone who's not going to be here. Like he's pretty open about it at this point.
Yeah, I think
he's like, it's probably my last. But maybe it's not. Like he keeps throwing that at the end.
I think he wants to be here, but he realizes.
Well, he knows the reality. Like if they were going to pay him, they would have already. Like that's how he works. Like if he's going to pay you a long-term deal, he would have given. Like Nigel Bradham was different, but they preferred Patrick Robinson to Nigel Bradham in the offseason.
Right. Well, and the thing is too is Brandon Graham was paid peanuts for his production.
Yeah.
So
I mean, it took him a while to get to the point where he's even productive. So he didn't really have. Now this is the first time he has leverage. Probably his last contract. Like I think he's excited about the positive. And there's gonna be teams that because you remove the guys who are gonna get franchise tagged and stuff like that. You know, like Ezekiel Ansah and there's another major one. I'm blanking right now. But there's a couple really good defensive ends who are technically gonna be free agents, but they're the type that won't be available. So Brandon Graham's gonna get a lot of money, but that'll be. After, if they are eliminated after this week, that'll be something we talk about.
Special teams.
Don't say his name.
Jake Elliott needs to make kicks.
There you go.
Needs to make all of his kicks. He's actually, some people might be thinking he's having a down year, but if he makes one more field goal, his numbers are literally identical.
Because people forget last year he missed a lot of short-term field goals, but he made all the clutch and long ones.
Yeah, he's a clutch kicker, and
he really is.
Sometimes you deal with there are kickers that are very accurate when it's just in the flow,
and then they miss.
And then they miss big kicks.
Hey, you'd rather the clutch kicker.
Right. I'd rather have a Jake Elliott than a Sebastian Janikowski, if that makes sense. But Matt Bryant's the guy who makes nothing but clutch kicks. I'll never forget it. I think it was 2010. He was with the Buccaneers. Or no. It was 2006, where he made that 60-yard field goal against the Eagles at the end of the game. It was insane. It hurt some of their playoff hopes. Anyway, as I ramble.
Rambling about special teams. Shocker.
Yeah. You know me. Fullbacks and special teams. Rick Lovato.
All right, let's throw our predictions and cap this off.
All right, cool. I don't remember what I predicted at the beginning of the week, but I'm going to go with 28-13 Philadelphia.
The Philadelphia Eagles, wow.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Here, I'm going to add
do you have the Vikings? What do you have for Vikings Bears?
I have the Vikings winning 24-20.
Okay. I actually have the Eagles offense just rolling still. I had them winning 38-21. I just don't think the Redskins are going to be very motivated. I know it's a division game and all that, but that's a mess over there. Like, they just cut one of their best players because he said some mean things about their defensive coordinator. Like, they signed Reuben Foster earlier this year. Like, it's a clown show over there. They've lost like 12 quarterbacks. They just placed Jordan Reed on IR. Like,
they just fired their entire
they fired like half their front office besides Bruce Allen, who will survive until Dan Snyder dies.
He must have pictures or something.
Or Dan Snyder's just the worst.
Yeah,
either one.
He is.
But like the Eagles, everything's going right. The Redskins, everything's not going right. And I know this could be a let-up game, and I'll probably be wrong because I'm always wrong with these things. But although I did predict the Eagles would win last week, so I got that right for once. But and then I have the Vikings winning too. I didn't really pick a score, but it'll be a close one.
Yeah, I think you'll be on your edge, the edge of your seat, and I think
unless you're standing.
Yeah, I think what will be interesting too is if the Eagles game closes and they've already won, and then there's like 4 minutes left. And the Vikings,
that'd be really
Bears. Cool. Oh, by the way, I should point this out. Pro Football Talk, great nugget. If the Bears and Vikings tie, that technically, if you have two ties, that counts as basically a 1 win and 1 loss. So they'd be 9-7, and they would have the tiebreaker.
They have the tiebreaker over the Eagles,
so they would make the playoffs. So
they need Vikings to lose.
You have to have a loss.
and a win from the Eagles.
Yeah. So
also a game that you should keep an eye on will be the Rams 49ers one, because that'll factor into whether the Bears try hard in the second half. And the 49ers, they placed like their running back on IR. They placed one of their best receivers, Dante Pettis, on IR. They actually played really well the last few weeks. They've been pretty competitive with better teams than them. And Kyle Shanahan's a really good coach.
Greg Keitel's going for the tight end record. He needs the...
You mean George Kittle?
George Kittle. What did I say?
You said Greg Keitel?
Greg Keitel, yeah. What am I doing?
That was
George
pretty bad.
Kittle.
It's not even a hard name.
I'm so tired. This has been a long week. Yeah, I'm preparing for
George
a baby.
Keitel.
So I'm sorry. The sleep's been non-existent. But
just call me a baby guy.
Anyway, yeah. So he's going for the. I said Greg Kittle. Is that what I said?
You said Greg Keitel.
Whatever. Anyway, George of the 49ers is going.
George of the 49ers.
Yeah, that's what I'm gonna call him.
Very royal.
Stone Cold's George.
Okay.
He's going for the record. I think he needs 98 or 99 yards. I could see that being a game where the Rams just come out and blow it. I could see it. I mean, they have not played well as of late, and I think if Gurley's not there, that takes another asset away from them. I don't know. I think this week's going to be exhausting.
It's going to be fun. At least
you're going to be having to pay attention to 3 separate scores.
Yeah,
and you're a Bears fan for a week.
And then you'll be hating the Bears for another week if they do what they need to do.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting matchup if it does happen as well.
All right. We'll end on that note. Thanks for listening, guys. As always, make sure you subscribe to the podcast. We're on all the apps. And thanks for listening.